Hope you enjoyed your bye week. Welcome back to the Steelers Now pregame scout. I'm Matt Gajtka alongside analyst Derrick Bell. As we get back to it, the Steelers are no longer in first place in the AFC North. That was a fun week while it lasted as the Baltimore Ravens picked up a win. So they're now 4-2. The Steelers were, of course, idle, and now they face the prospect of traveling cross country, getting acclimated to the time zone, and taking on the LA Rams at SoFi Stadium in a game that most of the country will see at about 4:15. Derrick, how'd you spend your bye week? You were joking with me that it was actually quite relaxing for you to just watch some football and not worry about having to break it all down.
Yeah, this might be a hot take, man, but I really enjoy like the 9:30 London games just because I'm a
Yeah.
football like nerd like that, and I really enjoy being able to get up on Sunday morning and immediately pop on some football like while I'm cleaning my house and cleaning my basement up. But yeah, my buddy, my daughter, my wife, just sat around the couch, watch football all day. I didn't have to like create any content, do any writing, or do any videos or anything like that. So that was kind of nice, just be able to watch some ball. And I also think it's kind of cool for me to be able to kind of zoom out a little bit and see like some of the trends around the league and some of the cool stuff that offenses and defenses are doing. So it was a relaxing bye week for sure. I'm ready. I'm ready for Steelers football this weekend, though. I'm ready to get back after it.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't get too used to it. Don't enjoy it too much because we've got,
Long way to
three
go.
solid months here of regular season to go. And of course, looking forward to potentially at least one playoff game. But that's still a long way down the pike. The Steelers are at 3-2. Like I said, in playoff contention, I suppose it is a privilege to worry about the standings at this point of the year. Better than being 1-5 or something like that. A lot of teams are in that hopeless position. As for the Steelers, part of the reason they're not hopeless, Derrick, is that George Pickens has done a wonderful job in the absence of Deontay Johnson, even, of taking over the number one role, at least technically. Now, when it comes to is he a real number one, quote unquote, in the NFL, what are your thoughts on that? Because you wrote up a nice piece on Pickens last week for Steelers Now Plus. I suggest all the viewers go back and check that one out. Pickens clearly a physically talented guy, a guy who can win one-on-one battles, a guy you can throw to the back shoulder, you can throw it up in the air. But what are you seeing from him overall, especially since Deontay has been out and hoping to get him back this week? But what have you seen without Deontay that might lead you to believe that he could carry the load as the number one guy on the Steelers going forward?
Yeah, I think it's no secret that Pickens has always been a really talented player. I mean, you listen to Mike Tomlin talk about it in the press conference. This was always. I think I wrote this kind of exact phrase in the article, but I feel like stardom has always been like Pickens' destiny. Like he's been somebody who the second he stepped on the field at Georgia, he just looked different, and that's really the best way to characterize it. He's not the typical 22-year-old receiver, just like he wasn't the typical freshman when he came to Georgia. So just some of the things that he's doing right now, I think at a really high level. You're seeing some improvements as a route runner. He's gathering some nuance to his game, understanding how to beat leverage, manipulate defenders, things like that. I've been encouraged by, the more that they put on his plate, with an expanded route tree, as he seemed like he's taken that on in stride. And he's still been really productive. Teams have done some creative things to try to take him away. They're treating him like a number one receiver. He's seeing clouded coverages, brackets, safety help, the number one corner on opposing teams. So teams are trying to take him away, but he's still been really productive. And then I think like last week was a little bit of a throwback to his rookie season. You mentioned the back shoulder stuff, and Baltimore came into the game and they were pretty much daring the Steelers like, all right, throw it over our head. Like we don't think you could do it. We like our guys on the outside as much or if not more than you guys like your weapons. And Pickens made a pay, man. Like down the stretch of that game, like he really took over, caught several back shoulders. Of course, he caught the game-winning touchdown with less than 2 minutes left to go in regulation. And I think it's really encouraging, the steps that he's taken forward, especially when you take into account that the Steelers are about to get, the guy who's been their number one wide receiver for the last 2-3 years. They're about to get that dude back in the lineup as well.
How do you think the Steelers keep finding these playmakers at wide receiver beyond the first round of the draft? They've been doing it for a long time, and now we're into our second general manager of doing that sort of thing. With Omar Khan, he's going to hope to continue that tradition that Kevin Colbert certainly started along with his scouting staff. So, what do you think the Steelers look for when they are scouting these college wide receivers? Why are they finding all these diamonds in the rough, I suppose, is the bigger picture question.
Yeah, I think it's a couple different things for me. I think anytime you see success like that for a specific position group, I think it tells you that everyone in the organization is on the same page. First and foremost, the scouting department is doing an excellent job finding specific traits on what they look for specific positions. And then, they're making sure that they're getting the coaching staff the right guys to help them mold at the next level. So I think that's always good because sometimes like when things don't work out for young players, it's because maybe the scouting department or maybe the coaches are on different kind of ideas, not necessarily on the same page, and that's never felt like that in Pittsburgh. It does help having Big Ben for however many years they did, whatever 2 decades. Having that level of quarterback play is awesome, but we're seeing them sustain that success even after that, with Pickens being kind of the latest star receiver that they've drafted. I think it just they know exactly what they want. In terms of like their ex receivers. You heard Tomlin this week talk about what Deontay brings to the table, expert route running. So like they've had a type for what that position, like what they want that position to look like. Deontay's not Antonio Brown, but like when you look at specific things that they do well, there is some similarities. The ability to be press coverage, the ability to run routes, create separation at the break point. Both of those guys do that at an extremely high level. So when you can put guys in the right position, exactly the traits that you want these specific positions to have. I think it gives your coaching staff a clear vision of what those guys are going to do for you at the next level, and it helps kind of accelerate the process to where these young guys can make an impact, really from day one almost with some of these guys.
Now, we don't know if Deontay Johnson's going to be back for Sunday against the Rams. He said last week that he was he was planning to be back. Mike Tomlin, a lot more non-committal at his Tuesday press conference. But I think we can reasonably expect that he's going to give it a go here. And whenever Deontay does come back, where do you think the division of labor goes as far as plays drawn up for a certain guy, as far as just raw snaps, and as far as the looks that the Steelers are going to give to opposing defenses with these two could be potentially number one quality receivers out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big boost to the Steelers offense. I mean, they're bottom three. I think they're 29th in success rate right now on offense. Kenny Pickett, we've talked at length, really about his struggles over the first 5 weeks of the season. I think having Deontay back is going to be really good for this offense for a couple of different reasons. I just think that the way that Deontay wins, that space generator, if you will, on the outside, I think that the timing aspect of like how his game works could really help, provide kind of a calming presence for Kenny Pickett. You look at the numbers and some of the outlying numbers for Pickett. This is something I wrote about for Steelers Now. Pickett's numbers really across the board on like 1 to 3 step drops. So those quick game throws, the ball's supposed to be out in less than 2.5 seconds. Those numbers are really down across the board. So I think some of that could be due to missing Deontay Johnson. You saw over the second half of last season, him and Johnson started getting on the same page. You saw some anticipatory throws from Pickett. Those guys just doing a good job being on the same page and getting into a rhythm. And Tomlin was asked about this during the press conference this week about how to get Kenny started earlier. Well, I think like having a guy where exactly where he's going to be, he's going to be open, that trust factor could help them. And when you have those two number one type receivers, like we really hope that the Steelers are going to have for the rest of the season between him and Pickens, it's going to force some difficult decisions on defensive coordinators on how they're going to play him. Because like some of the stuff that they've been doing to try to take Pickens away, some of the deep ball stuff, I'll mention some of the bracket coverages, the clouded coverages, things like that. With Deontay back in the lineup, teams are going to have a decision to make on who they're going to focus more of their attention to, and that's going to open more opportunities up for the other guys in the lineup.
Well, speaking of scheming it up, the Steelers will go at it against the Rams here, trying to have a more consistent performance, trying to give their best playmakers on the offensive side a chance to succeed, not just on the final drive of the game. I know that's not how they drew it up against the Ravens, but that's how it ended up. Another ugly win for the Steelers, and especially ugly in relation to the offense. So there was an interesting data visualization, I guess you could call it, I saw out there on X/Twitter, whatever we want to call it this week, noting that the Steelers were dead last in the NFL in facing perfect covered plays. In other words, the defenses they're going against are covering up their plays more than any other team in the league, as far as having defensive backs in the proper positions, as far as stymieing them and preventing their success rates. So And you look at a team like the 49ers, this was in relation to a discussion on Brock Purdy and why he's doing so well. Because a lot of times he's thrown against busted coverages, and the Steelers and Kenny Pickett in particular are not on the opposite side of that thing. So I know we've talked about play action before. We've talked about different things, but what's your take on that bit of data, which I found pretty compelling and also matching up with what a lot of us are talking about when we look at the Steelers offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, several different things. We just got through finished talking about, no Deontay Johnson in the lineup. Pat Fryermuth didn't play as well last week. So, the absence of having, your number one wide receiver is going to, especially the guy who literally, according to like ESPN analytics last year, was the most open wide receiver in the National Football League. So when you take that guy away, like, yeah, you're gonna be facing a lot tighter looks on the offensive side of the ball. But just from a schematic perspective, I think play action, is a valid point. Play action is one of these things where like we almost talk about it in too broad of a scope. You don't necessarily have to use play action. You don't necessarily have to use motion in order for your offense to be extremely effective. It's just a really good efficiency booster for those offenses that maybe don't have like necessarily the superstar talent, maybe at quarterback, or maybe you're trying to shore up some offensive line deficiencies, or maybe you got some receivers that struggle to create separation. So that is one of the interesting talking points. Like if you look at it, Kenny Pickett's only got 9 passing attempts, right, from this season where they've been under center and they've been using play action. That's 26th in the National Football League. I mean, there's some guys that are backups that are higher up in percentage on that. So that's one of the things, just being a little predictable. And I think with the Steelers passing game in general, one of the long complaints that I've had is, they do run a lot of like the classics stuff in terms of like the old school passing concepts. They run some really elementary stuff, but it just seems like the game planning aspect of it, okay, we think that we're going to get this coverage on third down when we're in third and long. Like that aspect of it just always seems like it's lacking to me, in addition to just the run and the pass game always seems so divided. And one of like they don't work off of each other enough. And I think that's how you get to some of these really cloudy pictures for the quarterback.
And looking at just the body of work so far from Matt Canada, the offensive coordinator, in terms of this year alone, are you seeing a big difference? We've had 5 games now compared to what we saw last year with, for the most part, Kenny Pickett at quarterback. Do you feel like there's been an adjustment, whether it be in a positive direction or a negative direction schematically?
Yeah, I mean they've tried to do some, and I don't want to make it seem like they haven't tried any adjustments. One of the big adjustments from the offseason was, they wanted to be more 12 personnel heavy. So they went out, they drafted Darnell Washington. So some of the stuff that they wanted to do early in the season with the run game, being in 12 personnel, running a little more gap scheme because they were extremely zone dependent last year. So they tried that, but the problem is they just haven't been able to run out of 12 personnel. They're getting bodied up front. So that's part of it too. And like we can talk about the schematic element of it, but when you're not winning blocks at the line of scrimmage, there's only so much you can do with that, especially if you're running like a gap scheme where that's dependent on getting that vertical displacement at the line. So that's been issues. They've tried some different stuff in the run game. I actually think that some of the answers that they've been able to find in the run game, it hasn't been nearly consistent enough, but it's at least been an effort. They've tried some inside zone stuff against light boxes, which I anticipate we'll see more of that this weekend against the Rams, who play a lot of light boxes. But they've tried some trap stuff against Houston. They've tried some answers. It just seems like this passing game, man, is just so outdated. It's so predictable. It's not explosive enough. And that's why, like, I think that the people that are constantly harping on the lack of play action is like, okay, how are we going to generate these explosive plays if we're not able to do it just from the straight drop back game? And it's hard to be an efficient offense when you can't throw the football efficiently, and they haven't been able to do that so far this year.
Okay, let's turn from scheme to personnel on third down here on the Steelers Now pregame scout. Thanks for watching and listening as we're back to get it revved up for, I was going to say the second half of the season. That's not quite right, but it is the post-bye portion of the season. Mike Tomlin has talked in the past about having quote-unquote avatar cornerbacks. I didn't see the movie, Derek, but I know what he's talking about. Long arms, just general tall cornerbacks in the Steelers defensive backfield. Well, they added another one this week as they made a shift. They ended up releasing Desmond King, and they signed Darius Rush, late of the Colts. He's a guy who fits into that avatar/alien mode, whatever you want to call it. Do you think this is a big value play for the Steelers, or just a matter of continuing to throw a certain body type at the wall and, for lack of a better term, see which one sticks, whether it be in the starting lineup or in a regular rotation.
Yeah, I think I like the swing a lot, man. To be honest with you, I mean, I went back and looked. I had Rush graded out as the I think 82nd or 83rd player on my big board. He slid all the way into the fifth round. That was surprising to a lot of draft kind of nicks out there. You know, Rush, like you mentioned, big, tall, long, fast. That's kind of the MO for what the Steelers have kind of been after over the last calendar year. You look at Joey Porter Jr., you look at Corey Trice, who unfortunately, suffered another serious injury. And then now Darius Rush. I think if you're going to take gambles on the position, really any position, but especially corner, which is traditionally a stopwatch position, if you will, taking these gambles, these dart throws on really athletic cornerbacks is smart. It's smart business. And, Rush also brings kind of a interesting floor to go along with his ceiling because he was a really good special teams player at South Carolina. He had like 15 special teams tackles. He has gunner experience. Now, will the Steelers need that from him necessarily off the bat? Probably not, because I don't even know if he's going to get a helmet to start this. They've got James Pierre, Miles Boykin out there. Maybe he's active, maybe he's not here in the next couple of weeks. But, I think that does give him a nice floor to potentially stick on the roster. And overall, Rush, he's pretty raw for the position. He's a former wide receiver convert, so that's something interesting about him as well. But again, I just like taking these are type of gambles that I'm all about taking, especially for free. I mean, this guy was literally off a practice squad. I like the gamble.
And when you look at other positions for the Steelers, is there another spot on the field? We've talked about offensive line perhaps being underperforming. Is there a spot where they can continue to look to guys who have been discarded from other organizations, that they can look to create some roster churn here? Do you feel like that could be in the offing, or do you think it should be in the offing for any other spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cornerback thing is really interesting because, we talked about, some of the struggles that the outside cornerbacks have had. Everybody's been pushing for more and more playing time for Joey Porter Jr., but the veterans in the room, Levi Wallace, Patrick Peterson haven't played particularly well so far this season. And, I like taking this gamble at corner. In terms of like some other positions, I think offensive line is a fair one to question. I think that the Steelers, if they're going to kind of explore some different maybe avenues in terms of upgrading offensive line play, I really think that it may just be a matter of like moving some pieces around. James Daniels, it sounds like he's going to be able to give it a go now that he's hopefully going to be fully healthy as the Steelers exit the bye week. Daniels is a guy who's played some center. He played some center, in college. He's played there in the NFL with Chicago. So he's a guy that they could potentially put at center with Mason Cole, struggling mightily over the first month of the season. That would be something that I would at least think about if those struggles continue for Cole. Because, especially with Kenny Pickett, man, like some of the stuff we talked about with his, his pocket navigation, his footwork being a little bit all over the place, just looking real antsy and uncomfortable. The center and the interior of the offensive line is really responsible for setting the depth of the pocket. So if you got a guy who's consistently losing quickly on a couple reps per game, that's not going to help get your quarterback in a good rhythm. So that's something that I would probably think about. Maybe not an outside solution, but there
Mhm.
might be an inside solution already there.
Just as a sidebar, how spoiled were the Steelers over the years to have someone like Ben Roethlisberger, who was always composed, regardless of how clean of a pocket he had, regardless of how deep he was dropping? It just always seemed like he had an ability to keep his eyes downfield and make a play. Is it just the fact that we in Pittsburgh here were used to that sort of thing and maybe didn't realize how pivotal having good pass blocking up front could be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Ben played for so long, so he was behind good offensive lines, really bad offensive lines, a mix. We got to see him in a ton of different environments, and I think really just in general, man, it's just something that it's frustrating now because they've got a young quarterback, one who's still really trying to figure out his way in the league. I think more than anything, man, it's just understanding that those type of quarterbacks, they just don't grow on trees, man. I mean, there's franchises that look for decades for those type of guys, and unfortunately, the Steelers are kind of joining the rest of the NFL and what it's really like to kind of be going through this rebuilding kind of process or transition process where you're going from a Hall of Fame quarterback to another youngster. And Ben wasn't always maybe the most traditional person in the pocket, but like his size, his athleticism. his arm, all those things allowed him to kind of mitigate, problems that the Steelers offense might have had throughout the years. And, that's definitely a luxury that, they no longer unfortunately have. But, I think the Steelers have done a decent job putting, complementary pieces, or at least the bare minimum around Kenny Pickett. I like the weapons that they've got on the outside. I really like Deontay Johnson, George Pickens. If the Steelers can find an identity on offense and get back to how they ran the ball so well last season after the bye week, I think it'll do a lot to calm Kenny Pickett down, because he's not a guy, especially at this stage of his career, where they're going to be able to just hand him the keys and he's going to take over. You're not expecting that. Really, you're just trying to get him more in a rhythm so that we can start getting back on kind of that upward trajectory with his development.
And still a long way to go in the season. 5 games down, 12 to play. Starting with this weekend at Los Angeles at SoFi Stadium. I mentioned it's going to be a 4 o'clock start for the Eastern time zone, and looking forward to seeing what the Steelers bring out of the bye. As far as the Rams are concerned, though, it's a 3-3 team, third place in the NFC West. They've beaten the Cardinals, they've beaten the Colts, they've beaten the Seahawks, those last 2 in close games. They've lost close games to the Bengals and the Niners, and they fell by double digits to the Eagles recently as well. I know you mentioned the Rams like to go with a light box, not a lot of folks, not a lot of congestion at the defensive front. Is there an opportunity perhaps for that running game to get going, especially on the inside with some decent blocking? How do you feel? I guess we'll start on the offensive side. How do you feel the Steelers offense matches up against the Rams defense?
Yeah, I'll be completely honest. I kind of got to eat some crow here, because I honestly thought that this Rams team was, they still had some older stars. You got Matt Stafford, Aaron Donald, Cooper Cup being injured to start the season. I kind of just assumed that this team was going to be like in purgatory. I thought that they were going to be really bad. I didn't like the way they finished the season last year. Stafford didn't look like the same player. They've honestly impressed me a lot, man. I think Sean McVay is doing a heck of a job, especially on offense. He's got them rolling. Even I think they're playing better than the box score would indicate, especially Stafford. But just from a defensive perspective, some of the stuff that they like, Raheem Morris, he's always been a really highly regarded defensive coordinator. They use a lot of dime personnel, so a lot of 6 defensive backs on the field. It's a lot of off coverage, too high safety presentations, like you mentioned, the light boxes. So they like to go with kind of like a 6-man front up front, and try to stop the run like that. The good thing for them is that they've been like pretty good about stopping the run. They're like top 10 in success rate. Anytime you're top 10 in success rate, and you're not dedicating a ton of resources to stopping the run, it kind of makes your pass defense stronger. And you look over on that side of the ball, man. Killer Witherspoon's playing really well, but I mean, I think the average football fan would struggle to name half the starters on the Rams defense right now. They're getting some serious contributions from guys like rookies, like Byron Young's playing extremely well next to Aaron Donald. He's kind of been his sidekick rushing the passer. So they're definitely playing above their talent level, in my opinion. And, Morris and Sean McVay, they deserve a lot of credit for that.
Matthew Stafford, you mentioned him, always a player that catches your eye, whether he was piling up the yardage in Detroit in some pretty hopeless situations and now got his Super Bowl out in LA. And like you said, I think it was reasonable to expect some of these veterans to perhaps ride off into the sunset, metaphorically speaking, not be at their best. But I still think Stafford can beat you if given the proper situation, if given the proper look. So what can the Steelers do to disrupt the Rams attack? How do you think they might be able to chip away at some of those vulnerabilities there?
Yeah, I mean, the Rams, they've kind of turned back the clock with some of their stuff that they're doing, but there's also a lot of differences between the last time that the Steelers saw this Rams offense. Still, it's a lot of 11 personnel, highest rate in the league. They utilize a lot of motion. They've kind of taken that little out motion that Miami's doing to create leverage in the pass game. They've taken that, and it seems like they're using it just about as much as anybody in the league. The big difference, I feel like, from this offense, this kind of happened like late last year with McVay, is like, I think we always kind of think about the Shanahan McVay type offenses as like zone blocking offenses, but the Rams are really gap heavy. They're the number 1 team in terms of gap run usage right now. So they're getting after you a little bit different. Kevin Dawson's playing really well in the middle for them. Steve Avila was a guy that I like a lot coming out of the draft. And then, you just look at the weapons. Atwell is the deep threat. Puka Nakua, he's had some historically great numbers for a rookie, working the intermediate areas of the field. Cooper Cup, everybody kind of knows about what he's
Mhm.
about. So, Stafford, man, he's a guy that's going to push the ball down the field. He's got a heck of an arm. His arm looks way better than it did last year. I don't know what he did over the offseason, but it looks really good. He's firing some lasers. He's going to push the ball. They throw a lot of in breakers. Really, for him, man, you just got to get him off his spot. Pass rush needs to be really good. The Rams' offensive lines played better than expected. That's probably been the biggest surprise for me personally. But if you can get him off his spot, he will take some chances. He's not the most mobile guy in the world. He's probably one of the least mobile quarterbacks in the NFL at this point. So the Steelers' edge rushers, they got to take advantage of that Rams offensive line in particular. They've had some injuries up there. They've kind of been mixing and matching. So far, it's worked out. But I don't know that they faced like a pass rush with this much high-end talent like the Steelers have with Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt. So we're gonna see how that works.
You mentioned on Twitter this week that Sports Info Solutions had the Steelers as the seventh most successful in terms of rush rate from their pass rushers, and of course T.J. Watt's at the top of that list. You saw Golden, you saw Highsmith in the teens as far as getting home and getting pressures on the quarterback. Is there anything scheme wise that the Steelers are doing to free up those dynamic players, or are we talking about? Do you think we're talking about just the talent coming through?
Yeah, I think they do some creative stuff in terms of just getting their guys one on ones, showing some kind of faux pressure or whatever you will at the line of scrimmage. But they've had some success with some stunts, especially with Alex Highsmith on that side of the ball. He got home a couple times with some successful stunts last week against Baltimore. But I consider it, man, it's more of just a talent thing. I mean, what Alex Highsmith did last week to Ronnie Stanley was criminal. I mean, I think he finished with 7 pressures. He was beating him just on every single rep that he was left one-on-one. It was really impressive. Cross chop was just killing Stanley. So when you got that guy as like kind of your second best pass rusher across from TJ Watt, it's pretty difficult to defend because kind of like what we were talking about with Pickens and Deontay, when you're going through your game planning process, whether you're on offense or defense, you got to figure out what you're going to take away. Teams, if they want to go ahead and, chip TJ Watt with the tight end or with a running back, or they want to slide the protection over there, well, then you're, leaving your left tackle one-on-one with Alex Highsmith. And, he's the type of player that's going to consistently win the majority of those matchups. So I think that's really the key this week in terms of stopping the Rams passing game is really just making sure, you flood the intermediate areas of the field. Stafford really loves to throw the ball in the middle. So make sure, you do a good job flooding those areas and get him off his spot, because if he's allowed to kind of just sit back there and set his feet, he's one of the few quarterbacks in the NFL that can actually legitimately make every throw. We use that cliche way too often to talk about quarterbacks, but there is not a throw on the field that Stafford cannot make. He knows it too. So he will test you. He'll access every bit of the field. You just got to make sure you get him off the spot. And the Rams run game too, like it's been pretty efficient. It was really good in the second half last week, but no Kyron Williams for them this week. So we're going to see I don't know who the heck's going to carry the ball for them this week. I have no idea. Maybe Zach Evans. They signed some guys too, but that'll be interesting to see because, if they can't run the ball, that's going to put more pressure on the passing game, force those offensive tackles to, pass set more than they probably want to.
All right, just about out of time of our action-packed half hour that we have weekly for you here on Steelers Now. This is the Steelers Now pregame scout. Let's wrap it up, though, with a prediction for this week's game. The Steelers are 1-1 on the road, Derek. They played a pretty solid one at Las Vegas against the Raiders, and then a massive dud pretty much at Houston. So where do you see this one going, and how much are we going to have to be sweating this one out in the fourth quarter?
I think this one's going to be a close game. I really do. I don't see the Steelers getting blown out, but then again, I really didn't think they'd get blown out against Houston either. But I do think that it is interesting because they're obviously with Shanahan and McVay working together for so long. They are different offenses and how they operate, but they do steal from one another. So I am very interested to see what McVay takes from some of the success that Shanahan and Slovic had against the Steelers early in the season. That's really the number one thing I'm looking for is what is he going to pull from out of those two successful performances. I think the Steelers have a good shot to win this one, but they absolutely have to make sure that they get a couple turnovers. Stafford, he's a guy who, like I said, he's going to try to test some windows. You have to take advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves. I think if the Steelers pass rush is good enough and it dominates, the Steelers will win. I think if they don't get enough pressure, they don't get turnovers, I think the Rams probably win. So that's the biggest thing for me. I know it's cliche as possible, but when the Steelers beat up the quarterback, when they get turnovers, they win. When they don't, they don't. So
Yeah.
it's pretty simple for me in terms of like keys to victory.
Hey, if it's a cliche, it's a cliche, but if it's true, it's true. And
That's
you,
true.
you
Yeah.
can't just swim against the current just for the sake of it. I suppose you could, but I don't know if it'd be very smart.
Not going anywhere, right?
Right, exactly. All right, so that's Derrick Bell. I'm Matt Gajtka. Again, visit SteelersNow.com, and you can find us on social media at PGH Steelers Now. And we'll talk to you next week with another Steelers Now pregame scout.